During the Middle Ages, the role of a king was that of a military and political leader. Some men were better as warriors, and others more agile in matters of administration. The first king of Portugal, Afonso I, though well experienced in both occupations, would fall mostly under the military leader who was more preoccupied with conquest and expansion of territory category. Meanwhile, his son, Sancho, who succeeded him as king in 1185, was mostly concerned, in his rule, with the settlement of the Kingdom of Portugal. There were several reasons as to why this happened, one of them being the fact that, by the time Sancho became a king, he had already served Portugal as the military ruler of the kingdom for 15 years. Another one had to do with the fact he wasn't as gifted as a military leader as his father had been, and one of the most important reasons had to do with the fact that the kingdom could not live forever fighting battles. There would always come a time where the focus would be on populating the land, which by that time was lacking severely in the number of inhabitants. Still, in the late 1180s, the king faced the Leonese on the battlefield, where he failed to conquer Celurico, but ended up successfully defending the country against the Leonese invasion of Trancoso and Linhares. By far, his most well-known as well as successful military action came when a Portuguese crusader army conquered Silves in 1189, but in 1190 and 1191 all would change. After the death of the Caliph Abu Yaqub Yusuf, caused by his failed invasion of Portugal, the emperor's son, Yaqub al-Mansur, came to power when he was only 14. Though his early years as an emperor were dedicated to fight a rival dynasty who was trying to overtake him in North Africa, by 1190 all had been solved, so he focused on a campaign to invade Portugal with the intent of avenging his father. The Caliph departed from North Africa in the spring of 1190 and reached Córdoba in the same year. From there, he divided his large army in three. One group of men headed to Silves, another one to Évora, and the last one, led by the Caliph himself, would reach the Tagus Valley, probably because that was the place his father died. The first and second groups were not able to conquer anything, and the third one, led by Al-Mansur, was able to take Torres Novas, but was defeated in Tomar by the Templars and forced to retreat to Al-Andalus on the 11th of July. But a year later, in the month of April, Al-Mansur returned. This time, the emperor focused his strength on attacking territories south of the Tagus, after he realized the impossibility of conquering cities located in central and northern Portugal, given the defeats he had suffered there in 1190. In June of 1191, Al-Mansur conquered Silves by means of negotiation, and Palmela as well as Alcácer do Sal by means of force, having enslaved the population of this last city, taking it to Marrakech with him in July. Thus, all the territory under the Tagus Valley in Portugal, except for the city of Évora, was now part of Al-Andalus again. Not too long after, Al-Mansur invaded Castile and defeated King Alfonso VIII at the Battle of Alarcos. Given the fact the kings of Leon had a history of allying themselves with the Almohads, the Castilian monarch understood the necessity of joining forces with the Portuguese, which he did. The Hispanic king was right, for the Leonese and even the Aragonese made a pact with Al-Mansur and invaded Castile. Therefore, Sancho I, in fear of the chance of Leon trying to conquer northern Portugal, invaded Galicia, part of the Kingdom of Leon, and conquered Tui as well as other lands. Thus, a new war would start between Portugal and Leon, with the Leonese monarch invading Bragança in northeast Portugal. Only in 1200 the war would end thanks to Pope Innocent III. After many years of wars, Sancho finally decided to fully focus on administration and building the country. So in 1191, the same year the Almohad invasion took place, the monarch signed the truce of half a decade with the North Africans. Both the Almohad Empire and Leon would not be a preoccupation for Sancho in the following years. Though peace was only assured in the late 1190s, Sancho had started to prove his interest with settling many lands by the first years of his rule. That is why, in 1186, Gouveia and Covilhã received the royal charter. The following year, it was the time of Viseu, Avô, Bragança and Folgazinho. In 1188, Valhelhas benefited in the same way, as well as Almada and Torres Novas in 1190. In the same year of the second Almohad raid, 1191, Mortágua also received the royal charter, and a year later, Penacova. By 1194, It was the time of Pontevel. In 1195, São Vicente de Beira, Povos, Leiria and Penedo. And in 1199, Belmonte and Guarda. But the quarrels didn't stop at the end of the 1100s, for in the 1200s, Sancho would issue another 9. In a matter of a few decades, the lands that King Afonso Henriques, Sancho's father, had conquered were finally being settled. The country of Portugal was taking form. Of those quarrels, the most important one was probably the one issued to the new city of Guarda, today one of the most inhabited in Portugal. Sancho needed a city to serve as a stronghold against possible Muslim invasions, so Guarda was created and settled on top of Serra da Estrela, the tallest mount in mainland Portugal. Thus it became, and still is to this day, the tallest city in the country, rising at an altitude of 1 kilometer. Though Afonso I had a good relationship with the church during his time of rule, the same would not be the case with Sancho, who found himself, several times, in different conflicts with various bishops of the kingdom and even the Pope, for multiple reasons. The first time he had troubles with the Bishop of Rome occurred when the king didn't pay the 2 yearly golden marks his father had promised the papacy. Only by 1198, Sancho paid Rome what he owed. The second conflict developed in the early 13th century, when the king took sides on a dispute among different clergymen. Years later, when Sancho's son, Afonso, and his future wife, Urraca of Castile, were passing by Porto, the bishop of the city, who the king had opposed in the referred conflict, refused to participate in the ceremony of marriage between the two. The prelate then issued an interdict on the city of Porto, and the king went as far as invading the churches of the clergymen who opposed him, as well as the cathedral of Porto, having even arrested priests. Then the bishop of Porto took refuge in Rome, where he told the Pope what was happening, giving him no chance but to order the excommunication of the king. The bishop of Zamora then threatened to excommunicate the kingdom if Sancho didn't offer reparations to the prelate. By the same time, another issue with a different prelate rose. This time the bishop of Coimbra accused Sancho of violating his rights and those of the other clergymen, for every time the king passed by the city, he would expel priests from their houses and would even arrest them without proof of any wrongdoings. But Sancho, now aged 56 and very close to dying, thanks to the action of the Archbishop of Braga as a mediator, reconciled with the two prelates. In his testament, he was very generous with both the church and his family, probably because he wanted to make amends for several bad decisions taken during his life. On the 26th of March of that year, Sancho died with a much younger age than that of his father. For 26 years, he oversaw the rise of cities and new settlements, as well as the populating of the young kingdom. There is no doubt that without him his father's conquests would have been in vain. The Almohads would have conquered territories north of the Tagus Valley, if not for Sancho's defense in 1190 and 1191. The Leonese would have attempted to conquer northern Portugal, if not for the king's advance on that kingdom by the late 1190s. Even more important than all of that, all of the land would have been wasted, for without people to populate it, its value would have been null. Thus, Sancho I deserves to be remembered as one of the most crucial kings in early Portuguese history.